There are moments in your life that act as doorways. They arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday night, a half-empty mug of tea, the low hum of a refrigerator, and you walk through them without realizing the architecture of your entire world has just been rearranged. For me, that moment was the specific quality of silence that filled my bedroom just before dawn, a silence made heavy and real by the presence of another person's breathing. It was the weight of Liam's arm thrown across my chest, a casual, unconscious anchor that had somehow become my new center of gravity. He was supposed to be on the couch. That had been the arrangement, the unspoken treaty that kept the fragile ecosystem of our friendship in balance. But for the seventh night in a row, I had woken up to find him here, tangled in my sheets, his back pressed against mine, a warm, solid line of trust and confusion that I didn't know how to navigate. And in that pale, pre-dawn light, with the city still asleep outside my window, I would lie perfectly still, cataloging the paradox of it all, the profound comfort of his proximity and the sharp, terrifying ache of knowing it was all built on a foundation of ambiguity, a beautiful, fragile house of cards that could be blown away by a single honest word. This was the ritual now, this silent migration in the dark, and I had become its most devout and most terrified observer. I met Liam 3 years ago, during one of those transitional periods of life that feel both infinite and fleeting. I was a junior in college, burrowed so deep into my photography coursework that I barely registered the changing seasons outside the darkroom. My world was a contained universe of chemical baths, f-stops, and the magical, slow-blooming emergence of an image on paper. I lived in a state of quiet observation, more comfortable behind a lens than in the middle of a conversation. Liam was the opposite. He was a force of nature, a software engineering major who seemed to operate on a different frequency of energy altogether. He didn't walk into a room. He entered it, and the room's atmospheric pressure seemed to shift with his arrival. He was loud, not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that was full of life, his laughter a rich, booming sound that could fill a lecture hall. He was on the university's soccer team, carrying with him the easy confidence of an athlete, a physical grace that I, with my quiet, deliberate movements, could only admire from a distance. We existed in entirely different orbits, and under normal circumstances, those orbits would never have intersected. The intersection came in the form of a shared elective, something ridiculously named the philosophy of aesthetics, which we both had taken to fulfill a humanities credit we'd put off for too long. I sat in the back, taking meticulous notes. He sat in the front, constantly engaged in debate with the professor, his hand always in the air, challenging concepts with a pragmatist logic that often left the more artistically minded students, myself included, quietly bewildered. I knew him only as the soccer guy, and he likely didn't know me at all. Then came the final project, a paired assignment to create a portfolio exploring a chosen aesthetic theory. As the professor read out the pairings, my stomach sank with each name that wasn't mine. I was a lone wolf, accustomed to the solitary peace of my own process. When I heard my name, Julian Mills, paired with Liam Carter, a quiet sort of dread settled in my bones. I envisioned weeks of chasing him down, of trying to explain the subtle nuances of wabi-sabi to a man who probably saw the world in clean, efficient lines of code. Our first meeting was exactly as awkward as I had predicted. We met in the library, a space I considered a sanctuary, and his restless energy seemed to break the sacred silence. He tapped his pen, bounced his knee, and looked at the books on the shelf as if they were puzzles to be solved rather than worlds to be entered. He admitted, with a disarmingly honest grin, that he had no idea what half the words in the syllabus meant. "I just need to pass," he'd said, running a hand through his perpetually messy brown hair. "You look like you actually know what you're doing." For a moment, I was annoyed. But then he looked at me, his hazel eyes clear and direct, without a trace of judgment, and I saw not arrogance, but a genuine, almost vulnerable, admission of being out of his depth. It was the first crack in the facade of the overconfident jock I had constructed in my mind. So, I started to explain. I talked about light and shadow, about composition and the emotion of color. I pulled out some of my prints, my hands shaking slightly as I laid them on the polished library table. They were mostly street photography, candid shots of strangers caught in moments of quiet contemplation, the kind of lonely beauty I was always chasing. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked, his head tilted, his usual kinetic energy stilled into a surprising focus. He traced the line of a shadow on one print with his finger, a shot of an old man reading a newspaper on a park bench, the late afternoon sun filtering through the leaves above him. "How do you do that?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "How do you see something like that?" I would have just walked right by, and in that question, the foundation of our friendship was laid. It wasn't about the class anymore. He was genuinely curious about the way I saw the world, and I, in turn, became fascinated by the way his mind worked, the logical structures, the clean problem-solving, the way he could break down a complex system into its essential components. He saw the architecture of the world. I saw its poetry. We passed the class, of course. Our project, a collection of my photographs paired with his surprisingly insightful written analysis of their geometric and emotional structures, earned top marks. But by then, the grade was incidental. We had started spending time together outside the library. He'd drag me to soccer games, and I'd stand on the sidelines, my camera a shield, capturing the explosive energy of the sport, the grace and power in his movements that he was completely unconscious of. In return, I'd take him on my photo walks through the city, and he would learn to be quiet with me, to see the things I saw, the way rust patterned a fire escape, the reflection of the sky in a puddle, the fleeting expression on a stranger's face. He became my most willing subject and my most honest critic. He never pretended to understand the technical aspects, but he always understood the feeling. "This one feels lonely," he'd say, pointing to a stark, black and white landscape. "But this one feels like hope." He was rarely wrong. It was somewhere in that first year of friendship, between the roar of the soccer stadium and the quiet click of my camera's shutter, that my feelings for him began to change. It wasn't a sudden landslide, but a slow, tectonic shift, a gradual realignment of my inner world. It was in the small things. The way he'd always save me a seat in the dining hall, even when his entire team was there. The way he'd remember a random comment I made about a film and text me weeks later when he saw it was playing at the campus cinema. The way he'd show up at my dorm room with pizza after I'd been in the darkroom for 12 hours straight, not saying much, just sitting on my floor and being a solid, comforting presence while I remembered what it felt like to be a person in the world again. He built a space for me in his life so effortlessly, so naturally, that I didn't realize until it was too late that I had started to furnish a room for him in my heart, a room I had no intention of ever showing him. Because Liam, for all his openness, moved through the world with the easy assumption of his own straightness. He dated, of course. There were a string of bright, cheerful girls who all seemed to be variations on a theme. They were nice enough, and I was always polite, playing the part of the supportive best friend. I'd listen to him talk about first dates and relationship troubles, my own heart a dull, persistent ache in my chest. I became an expert in the art of emotional redirection, of keeping my expression neutral while a quiet storm raged inside me. Loving him was like living in a house with a beautiful, locked door. I knew what was on the other side, a warmth, a light, a sense of home I craved more than anything. But I didn't have the key, and I was too terrified of breaking the door down to ever try. Our friendship was too precious, too vital. It was the central pillar of my life, and I would rather live in the hallway, admiring the door, than risk losing the entire house. So I buried my feelings deep, under layers of casual banter and quiet support. I learned to live with the ache, to treat it as a part of my own internal landscape, a secret, shadowed valley only I knew how to navigate. The catalyst, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion but a quiet, gutting implosion of Liam's own world. He had been dating Sarah for almost a year, since just after we graduated. It was the most serious he'd ever been about anyone. They'd moved in together 6 months ago into a small, bright apartment on the other side of town. I had helped them move, lifting boxes filled with their shared future, a small, bitter pill dissolving on my tongue with every piece of furniture I carried over the threshold. From my perspective, they seemed happy in that conventional, picture-perfect way. He was working long hours at a tech startup, she was in law school, and their life seemed to be following a pre-approved blueprint. I saw less of him during that time, but we still talked almost every day, our friendship a constant, steady current beneath the surface of his new life. I had resigned myself to this new reality, to my permanent role in the supporting cast of his story. The call came on a Wednesday night. It was late, close to midnight, and the city was slick with a cold, persistent rain that had been falling for hours. I was on my couch, editing photos, the only light in my apartment coming from the glow of my monitor. When my phone lit up with his name, my first thought was that it was a pocket dial. He never called this late. I answered, and the first thing I heard was not his voice, but the sound of rain and the muffled roar of traffic. Then, he spoke, and his voice was a ghost of itself, thin and frayed at the edges. "Jules," he said, and the use of my old college nickname was like a key turning in a lock I'd forgotten existed. Can I come over?" There was no explanation, no preamble, just that raw, hollowed-out question. I didn't need to ask why. I could hear the shattering of a world in those few words. "Of course," I said, my own voice steady, a rock for him to hold on to. "I'll buzz you in." When I opened my door 10 minutes later, he looked like a shipwreck. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his jacket was soaked through, and he was holding a single, damp cardboard box that seemed to be sagging under the weight of its own misery. But it was his face that stopped my breath. His usual vibrant energy had been extinguished, leaving behind a kind of gray, hollowed-out exhaustion. His eyes, normally so bright and alive, were dull and unfocused. He looked utterly and completely lost. He stepped inside, dripping onto my hardwood floor, and set the box down with a soft thud. It was filled with a random assortment of his life, a framed photo, a couple of books, a worn-out soccer trophy from college, a tangled mess of charging cables. The flotsam and jetsam of a life suddenly cast adrift. She said she needed space. He mumbled, not looking at me, his gaze fixed on a scuff mark on the floor. Said she's been feeling it for a while. That we want different things. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were glassy with unshed tears. She asked me to leave. Tonight. The words hung in the air between us, stark and brutal. I didn't know what to say. All the comforting platitudes felt like cheap, flimsy things in the face of such raw pain. So I said nothing. I just stepped forward and pulled him into a hug. He was stiff at first, his body rigid with shock and grief. Then, slowly, he seemed to collapse against me, his head dropping onto my shoulder, and a single, ragged sob escaped him. It was a sound of such profound brokenness that it felt like it was being torn from my own chest. I just held him, my hand on the back of his wet hair, the rain from his jacket seeping into my shirt, and let him break. After a while, the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. He pulled away, wiping his face with the back of his hand, a gesture of embarrassed self-consciousness that was so quintessentially Liam it made my heart ache. "Sorry," he muttered. "Don't be," I said, my voice quiet. I steered him toward the bathroom, handed him a towel, and told him to take a hot shower. While he was gone, I stripped my guest bed, which was really just a glorified futon in my small office, and put on fresh sheets. Then I went to the kitchen and made him a cup of tea, the way my mom used to for me when I was sick or sad, a simple, warm ritual of care. When he came out of the bathroom, wrapped in one of my oversized towels, the color was slowly starting to return to his face. He looked exhausted, but a little more human. I handed him the mug, and our fingers brushed for a second, a fleeting spark of warmth in the cold, quiet apartment. He sat on my couch, sipping the tea, and started to talk. It all came pouring out of him in a disjointed, painful rush. The small arguments, the growing distance, the things Sarah had said, the things he wished he'd said. I just sat on the floor across from him and listened, not interrupting, not offering advice, just being a quiet container for his grief. I was the anchor he needed in the storm, the one fixed point in his spinning world. It was a role I knew how to play. I had been playing it for years. But this was different. He wasn't on the other side of town anymore. He was here, in the center of my small, carefully curated world, his pain and vulnerability laid bare on my living room floor. The boundary between our lives had dissolved. When he finally ran out of words, a heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the sound of the rain still tapping against the window pane. "I don't know where to go, Jules," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My parents are on vacation, and I can't face anyone else right now." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Could I just for a few days? Just until I figure things out? The couch is fine. I won't be in your way. I promise." The question was a formality. We both knew the answer. "Liam," I said softly, "you can stay as long as you need. This is your space, too. You're not in the way." A wave of relief washed over his face, so palpable it was almost a physical thing. He nodded, his throat working. "Thank you," he whispered. I showed him the futon, gave him a set of my old sweats and a t-shirt to sleep in, and told him to get some rest. I left the door to the office slightly ajar, a silent signal that he wasn't alone, before retreating to my own room. As I lay in my bed, listening to the rain and the unfamiliar sounds of another person settling into the quiet rhythms of my home, I felt a strange and dangerous mix of emotions. A deep, empathetic sorrow for his pain, and a terrifying, selfish spark of hope. He was here. He was under my roof. And I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and frightened me, that nothing would ever be the same. The first night, he stayed on the couch, which in my apartment was more of a large, cushioned bench than a proper sofa. I had given him the best pillows and the thickest blanket I owned, but I knew it was a poor substitute for a bed. I lay awake for hours, listening. My apartment was small, a railroad-style layout where the living room flowed into a small hallway that led to my bedroom. Every sound was magnified in the stillness of the night. The groan of the building's old pipes, the distant wail of a siren, and closer, the soft rustle of fabric as Liam shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. I heard him sigh, a long, drawn-out sound of pure exhaustion. At one point, I heard a small, choked noise, and I knew he was crying again, quietly, in the dark, trying not to be heard. Every instinct in me screamed to go to him, to offer some kind of comfort, but I stayed in my bed, my muscles clenched, my hands fisted in my sheets. I was terrified of crossing a line, of misinterpreting his need for comfort as an invitation for something more. The line between friend and something else felt thinner and more fragile than ever, and I didn't dare test its strength. The second night was much the same. He was quiet during the day, a ghost haunting the edges of my apartment. He'd sit at my kitchen table, staring at his phone, trying to untangle the logistical and emotional knots of his suddenly dismantled life. He made calls to his bank, to the utility companies, his voice flat and robotic. I tried to give him space, retreating to my office to work, but the awareness of his presence was a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. It was like having a low-grade fever. Everything felt slightly off, heightened, more sensitive. That night, I again heard him tossing and turning on the couch. Around 2 in the morning, a guttural cry ripped through the silence of the apartment. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp with terror. I was out of bed in an instant, my heart pounding in my chest. I found him sitting bolt upright on the couch, his hands tangled in the blanket, his breathing coming in ragged, panicked gasps. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast long shadows across his face, making him look young and terribly vulnerable. "Liam," I said softly, not wanting to startle him further. He flinched, his head snapping up to look at me, his eyes wide and unfocused. It took him a second to recognize me, for the geography of the room to reassert itself around him. "Jules," he breathed, his voice hoarse. "Sorry. Bad dream." He ran a shaky hand over his face. I dreamt I was falling, and I couldn't find anything to hold on to." His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was such a perfect, brutal metaphor for what he was going through. I sat down on the edge of the coffee table, facing him. The space between us felt charged, electric with his fear and my desperate, unspoken need to soothe it. "It was just a dream," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "You're okay. You're here." He nodded, but his body was still thrumming with adrenaline. He was shivering, though the apartment wasn't cold. It was then that the first brick was removed from the wall I had so carefully constructed. I don't even remember making a conscious decision. The words just came out, a quiet offering. If you want, you can take my bed. I can sleep out here." It was a clumsy, foolish offer. The couch was terrible, but it was all I could think of to do. He shook his head immediately. "No, man. No way. This is your place." He looked away, toward the dark hallway that led to my bedroom. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. And then, he said it, the sentence that would become the first step in our silent, nightly ritual. His voice was small, hesitant, as if he were testing the weight of the words before letting them go. Would it be weird if I just came in there? I don't need the bed. I could just sleep on the floor. I don't want to be alone right now." The plea in his voice was so raw, so stripped of all his usual bravado, that it bypassed all my defenses, all my carefully reasoned fears. Saying no would have been an act of cruelty. "Don't be an idiot," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "You're not sleeping on the floor. Come on." He followed me back to my bedroom like a lost child. The room felt different with him in it, smaller and somehow more sacred. "I have a queen-sized bed," and I gestured to the empty side. "Just get in," I said, trying to sound casual, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. He hesitated for a moment at the foot of the bed, a silhouette of uncertainty in the dim light. Then he slid under the covers, staying as far to his edge of the mattress as possible, creating a careful, respectful distance between us. He lay on his back, his hands folded on his chest, as stiff as a soldier at attention. I got in on my side, mirroring his posture. The space between us felt like a chasm, a foot of empty mattress that crackled with unspoken tension. For a long time, neither of us moved or spoke. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear the soft sound of his breathing as it slowly, gradually, began to even out, losing its ragged, panicked edge. The sheer, overwhelming fact of his presence here, in my bed, was so enormous that my mind couldn't quite process it. I just lay there, my senses on high alert, listening to him breathe. After what felt like an eternity, his breathing deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. Only then did I allow myself to relax, my own body finally unclenching. I didn't sleep much that night. I was too aware, too conscious of the man sleeping beside me, a universe of unspoken things resting in the space between our bodies. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. The indentation on the pillow next to mine was the only evidence he had been there at all. When I emerged from my room, he was already in the kitchen, making coffee, his back to me. The awkwardness was a thick, tangible thing in the air. "Morning," he said, his voice tight. "Thanks for last night, don't mention it." I replied, my own voice equally strained. "We didn't talk about it. We let the event hang in the air, unexamined, and by unspoken agreement, we both pretended it was a one-time anomaly, a product of a nightmare and nothing more." That night, he went to the couch without a word. I went to my bed, and for a few hours, the old boundaries seemed to have been restored. But around 3 in the morning, I was woken by the soft creak of my bedroom door. I didn't move, my eyes closed, my breathing even. I feigned sleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard his soft footsteps, then felt the dip in the mattress as he carefully, quietly, slid into bed. He didn't touch me. He just lay there, on his side, facing away from me, a silent, warm presence in the dark. He hadn't been woken by a nightmare this time. He had just come, and I, in my feigned sleep, had let him. This became the ritual. It was a silent, nocturnal migration, a pattern established without a single word. He would start the night on the couch, a performance of respecting my space for an audience of one. And then, in the deepest part of the night, when the world was at its most quiet, he would slip into my room and into my bed. I never acknowledged it. I always pretended to be asleep. It was a delicate, unspoken agreement, a piece of theater we were both performing for each other's benefit. It allowed him the plausible deniability of seeking comfort in a state of semi-consciousness, and it allowed me to accept this strange, new intimacy without having to question it, without having to risk everything by asking what it meant. My bedroom became a liminal space, a place outside the rules of our daytime friendship. The night was a territory of blurred lines and unspoken needs, while the day was for restoring the fiction of our platonic arrangement. With each passing night, the invisible line between us on the mattress seemed to shrink. The first week, he was a ghost, a presence I felt more than touched. But then, things began to shift in small, incremental ways. One night, I woke up to find his hand resting on the mattress, just inches from my own. I lay there for an hour, my entire being focused on that small patch of skin, on the temptation to close the distance, to intertwine my fingers with his. I didn't, of course, but the possibility of it hummed in the air. A few nights later, he turned over in his sleep, and his arm came to rest across my waist. My body went rigid. I held my breath, waiting for him to realize what he'd done and pull away. But he didn't. He just sighed, a soft, contented sound, and snuggled closer, his face nuzzling into the space between my shoulder blades. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. It was the most intimate physical contact I had ever shared with him, and it was happening under the guise of sleep. I felt like a thief, stealing these moments of closeness that weren't meant for me, that were likely just the product of his subconscious seeking warmth and comfort, a human hot water bottle. But God, the ache in my chest was exquisite. It was a torturous kind of bliss, and I was addicted to it. My life became a study in duality. During the day, I was Julian, the supportive friend. I helped Liam search for new apartments online. I listened to him talk on the phone with his mom. I made him dinner and tried to coax him into eating. We'd watch movies on the couch he was supposed to be sleeping on, a careful foot of space between us, our conversation light and easy, a perfect replica of the friendship we'd always had. He was slowly starting to resemble his old self again. The color was returning to his face. His laughter, when it came, sounded less hollow. He was healing, and I was the backdrop for his recovery. But at night, in the dark of my bedroom, a different story was unfolding. He was no longer just a presence. He was a physical reality against my own body. He was a natural cuddler, a fact I was discovering in breathtaking, heart-stopping increments. He would throw a leg over mine, drape an arm over my chest, or bury his face in my neck, his soft breaths warming my skin. I became a connoisseur of his sleeping habits. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way his muscles would twitch when he was deep in a dream, the soft, low snore he'd sometimes let out. I would lie awake for hours, trapped and pinned by the weight of his sleeping form, and I would feel a sense of peace so profound it terrified me. This was a fragile, borrowed intimacy, and I knew it had an expiration date. Soon, he would find an apartment. He would move out, and this nightly ritual would end. The thought of my bed feeling empty again, of my room returning to its solitary silence, was a cold knot of dread in my stomach. The days stretched into a week, then two. He found a potential apartment, a decent place not too far from his work. He was scheduled to see it on a Friday. On Thursday night, the air in the apartment felt different. It was heavy with unspoken things. We were both acutely aware that our time in this strange domestic bubble was coming to an end. We ate dinner in near silence. After, we sat on the couch, a movie playing on the television that neither of us was watching. The space between us felt wider than ever, a canyon of impending separation. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap, but the words wouldn't come. What could I possibly say? Please don't go. Please keep sneaking into my bed every night because it's the only thing that makes me feel whole. The absurdity and impossibility of my own feelings kept me silent. He went to the couch early, and I retreated to my room, the sense of an ending hanging over me like a shroud. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open in the dark, my ears straining for the familiar sound of my door creaking open. 1 o'clock came and went. Then 2. Then 3. He didn't come. A cold, hollow ache spread through my chest. It was over. He was already pulling away, re-establishing the boundaries, preparing for his departure. The realization was so painful it felt like a physical wound. I finally understood that the hope I had been secretly nurturing was a foolish, dangerous thing. I had let myself believe, in the quiet darkness of my room, that this meant something more. I had been wrong. I turned over, burying my face in my pillow, the scent of him, of his shampoo, still faintly lingering on the fabric. A single, hot tear escaped and soaked into the cotton. I had to let this go. I had to be the good friend, the supportive friend. I had to be happy for him when he got his new apartment and his life went back to normal. And I had to somehow figure out how to put myself back together after he left. Just as I was finally drifting into a restless, grief-stricken sleep, I heard it. The softest, most hesitant creak of my bedroom door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare to move, didn't dare to hope. He stood in the doorway for a long time, a dark shape against the faint light from the hallway. I could feel his gaze on me. I knew he was watching me, trying to see if I was awake. Then, he moved, not towards the bed, but towards the window. He stood there, looking out at the sleeping city, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't coming to bed. He was just standing there. What was he doing? What was he thinking? The silence was a living thing, filled with a tension so thick I could barely breathe. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he turned from the window and walked slowly to the side of my bed. I braced myself for the familiar dip of the mattress, for the warmth of his body sliding in beside me. But it didn't come. He just stood there, looking down at me. I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that he knew I was awake. This was different. The performance was over. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I kept my eyes closed, my body perfectly still. It was a coward's response, but I didn't know what else to do. If I opened my eyes, if I acknowledged him, the spell would be broken. The delicate, unspoken rules of our nightly ritual would shatter, and we would be forced to confront what we were doing. I wasn't ready. I was terrified of what I would see in his eyes, pity, or worse, disgust. So I hid behind the pretense of sleep, my last line of defense. But he didn't leave. He just kept standing there. I could feel his presence like a pressure against my skin. Then, his voice, a low whisper that cut through the silence and strayed into my soul. Jules. It was not a question. It was a statement. He knew. He had probably known all along. My eyes fluttered open. In the dim, silvery light filtering through the window, I could see his face. He wasn't looking at me with pity or disgust. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of uncertainty, fear, and something else, something deeper that I didn't dare to name. I didn't say anything. I just looked back at him, my own fear and confusion and a desperate, aching love all exposed in my gaze. The silence stretched, thin and taut, a wire pulled to its breaking point. He knelt down beside the bed, bringing his face level with mine. His eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw a reflection of my own vulnerability. "I'm not asleep," he whispered, and the confession seemed to cost him everything. It was an admission that this was not an accident, not a subconscious act of a grieving man. It was a choice. He had been choosing to come to my bed, night after night. "I know," I whispered back, my voice thick. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before it came to rest on my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, a gesture so tender, so impossibly gentle, that it undid me. All the walls I had built, all the years of careful self-preservation, crumbled to dust in that single, feather-light touch. His eyes never left mine. They were filled with a question he didn't seem to know how to ask. He was giving me an out. I could pull away, I could make a joke, I could pretend this wasn't happening. I could save us both and retreat to the safety of our friendship. But I was so tired of being safe. I was so tired of living in the hallway. I leaned into his touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. It was my answer. A shudder went through his body, a release of some long-held tension. He moved closer, the warmth of his breath ghosting across my lips. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my mouth, and the air crackled with the energy of a lightning strike about to happen. My entire world had shrunk to this single moment, to the inches between our faces, to the unspoken thing that was finally about to be said. He closed his eyes, as if gathering his courage. "Would it be okay," he breathed, his voice trembling slightly, "if I kissed you?" The question was a gift. It was an offering of respect, of consent, of a vulnerability so profound it made my heart ache. He wasn't taking, he was asking. He was placing the entire, fragile future of our relationship in my hands. And in that moment, all my fear dissolved, replaced by a wave of certainty so powerful it felt like coming home. I didn't answer with words. I closed the remaining distance between us and pressed my lips to his. It wasn't a passionate kiss, not a kiss of pent-up desire. It was a kiss of quiet confession. It was tentative, soft, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of salt and sleep and years of unspoken affection. His lips were softer than I had ever imagined. He made a small sound in the back of his throat, a sigh of relief or recognition, and kissed me back, his hand still cupping my face as if I were something precious and breakable. It lasted only a moment, but it was a moment that redrew the map of my world. When we pulled away, we just looked at each other, our foreheads resting together, our breathing mingling in the small space between us. The silence that followed was not empty or awkward. It was full. It was a new kind of silence, one that didn't need to be filled with words. It was the sound of a door, one I had been staring at for years, finally, gently, swinging open. The morning after was a study in fragile, terrifying newness. I woke up first, to the feeling of Liam's arm still draped over me, his head on my shoulder, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm against my neck. For a moment, a pure, unadulterated joy bloomed in my chest. This was real. The kiss hadn't been a dream conjured by my own desperate longing. He was here, with me, and the world felt brighter, sharper, more real than it had just yesterday. But as the sun began to cast long, golden stripes across the bedroom floor, a cold tendril of anxiety began to curl in my stomach. What now? What were we? The kiss had been a question and an answer, yes, but it had also opened a Pandora's box of new, more complicated questions. I lay perfectly still, not wanting to wake him, not wanting to break the spell of the morning. I wanted to live in this moment, this perfect, quiet bubble of intimacy, for as long as I possibly could. Eventually, he stirred, his body stretching against mine. He made a soft, sleepy sound and nuzzled his face deeper into my shoulder before his eyes fluttered open. For a split second, they were soft and unfocused, and he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made my heart stutter. And then, recognition dawned. Memory flooded back into his expression, and something shifted. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of wide-eyed panic. He pulled away from me so quickly it felt like a physical recoil, scrambling to the far edge of the bed as if he'd been burned. The warmth of his body was instantly replaced by a chilling cold. He stammered, not looking at me, his eyes fixed on the wall. I need to get some air." He was out of the bed and out of the room before I could form a single word. I heard the front door of the apartment open and click shut, and then silence. A heavy, ringing silence that was so much worse than any of the silences we had shared before. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, the ghost of his touch still lingering on my skin. The beautiful, fragile house of cards had come crashing down. I had been a fool, an idiot. What had I expected? That a single kiss in the middle of the night could magically erase years of his life, his identity? He was grieving, confused, vulnerable. I was his best friend, his safe harbor. And I had led him, or maybe even pushed him, into crossing a line that he was clearly not ready for. The narrative in my head began to spin, each thought more toxic than the last. It wasn't a confession. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. He was regretting it, disgusted by it, and probably disgusted by me. The joy for moments before curdled into a bitter, familiar shame. I had ruined it. I had ruined everything. Our friendship, the one thing I had treasured above all else, was now a casualty of my own selfish desires. He was gone for hours. I showered and dressed in a haze of dread, every sound from the hallway outside my apartment making me jump. When he finally returned, the key turning in the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He walked in, avoiding my eyes, and went straight to the kitchen. The easy intimacy of our shared space was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. We were two strangers sharing a too small apartment. He busied himself with making coffee, his movements stiff and unnatural. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, my arms crossed over my chest, a desperate need for answers warring with a paralyzing fear of what those answers might be. "Liam," I said, and my voice sounded weak, foreign. He flinched, but didn't turn around. "We need to talk about last night." He let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders slumping. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice flat. "It was a mistake. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I was messed up. It won't happen again." Each word was a hammer blow. A mistake. It won't happen again. He was erasing it, invalidating the most honest moment of my life, reducing it to a symptom of his breakup. Anger, hot and sharp, flared through the fog of my hurt. It wasn't just my pain I was feeling. It was a righteous indignation on behalf of that moment, on behalf of the vulnerability we had shared. "A mistake," I said, my voice gaining an edge of steel I didn't know it possessed. "Is that what it was?" Because it didn't feel like a mistake to me, Liam. It felt like the truest thing that has ever happened in this apartment. He finally turned around, and his face was a mask of conflict. He looked trapped, hunted. "What do you want me to say, Jules?" he shot back, his voice rising. "That I'm suddenly gay? That I've been secretly in love with you all this time? I'm not. I don't know what that was, okay? I'm confused, and my life is a complete wreck, and you're my best friend. I can't." His voice broke on the last word. He looked so utterly lost, so torn apart by his own confusion, that my anger evaporated as quickly as it had come, leaving only a deep, profound sadness in its wake. "You can't, or you won't?" I asked, my voice quiet again. "Because there's a difference." He just stared at me, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with a desperate, cornered pain. He didn't have an answer. He turned back to the counter, his back a rigid wall between us. The conversation was over. The rest of the day passed in a state of agonizing, polite avoidance. We moved around each other like ghosts, the air thick with unspoken words. He made a call and confirmed he would take the new apartment. He would be moving out on Sunday. 2 more days. It felt like a death sentence. That night, he didn't even make a pretense of sleeping on the couch. He took a pillow and a blanket and made a bed for himself on the floor of the office, closing the door firmly behind him. The sound of that click was a definitive, heartbreaking punctuation mark. The door to my bedroom, the one he had passed through so many times, remained closed all night. My bed felt cavernously, brutally empty. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, Saturday, was worse. The silence was no longer tense. It was dead. It was the silence of a tomb. He had packed up the few things he had brought with him into his sad cardboard box. It sat by the front door, a constant, nagging reminder of his imminent departure. I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't eat, couldn't work, couldn't think. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. I had flown too close to the sun, and now I was falling, and the ground was rushing up to meet me. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. The prospect of losing him was unbearable. But the thought of losing him like this, in a fog of misunderstanding and fear, was a torment I refused to endure. If our friendship was going to end, it was going to end with the truth, not with this cowardly, suffocating silence. I found him in the living room, staring out the window, the same way he had stood in my bedroom 2 nights before. My heart twisted. I walked up behind him and stood there for a moment, gathering my courage. My entire future with him, in any capacity, hinged on what I was about to say. "Liam," I began, and my voice was surprisingly steady. He didn't turn around. "I need to say something, and you don't have to say anything back. You just have to listen. Please." He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. I took a deep breath. "I'm in love with you," I said. The words, the ones I had held captive for so long, were finally free. They hung in the air between us, terrifying and liberating all at once. I have been for a very long time, probably since that first semester in college. And I have never, not once, said anything because our friendship means more to me than anything else in the world. I would never have risked it. Ever. I paused, my throat tight. What happened the other night? That wasn't a mistake for me. It was everything. And the fact that you came to my bed, night after night. I let myself hope that it meant something to you too. Not just as a friend, but as something more. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe I saw what I wanted to see. And if I was, I am so sorry for misreading everything. But what you said yesterday, that it was a mistake, that hurt more than you can possibly imagine. Because it made me feel like I was something to be ashamed of. Like my feelings for you were something to be ashamed of. I could feel tears welling in my eyes. But I blinked them back, refusing to cry. I love you. And if that means I can only be your friend, then I will be the best damn friend you have ever had. I will go back to living in the hallway and admiring the door. But I cannot pretend that kiss didn't happen. And I can't live in this silence. So please, just tell me the truth. Whatever it is. Was it really just a mistake? He stood there for a long time, his back still to me, his shoulders rigid. The silence stretched on, and with every passing second, my heart sank lower and lower. I had done it. I had finally broken everything beyond repair. I had laid my heart bare, and he was going to step over it on his way out the door. I was about to turn and walk away, to retreat to my room and shatter in private, when he finally spoke, his voice thick and choked with emotion. No, he whispered. He turned around, and his face was a wreck of unshed tears. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression utterly tormented. No, he said again, louder this time, his voice breaking. It wasn't a mistake. That's the problem. He took a step towards me, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I came to your bed every night because it was the only place in the world where I felt safe. It was the only place where the noise in my head would stop. And it wasn't because it was a bed. It was because it was your bed. Because you were in it. He was crying now, the tears he had been holding back finally tracking down his face. That kiss when I asked you. I have never been more terrified in my entire life. And when you kissed me back, it was like, for 1 second, everything made sense. And then the sun came up, and I looked at you. And I panicked. Because what does this mean, Jules? I've only ever been with women. My whole life, my whole identity, it's all built on that. And then there's you. And nothing makes sense anymore. I felt like I was drowning, and I was scared. I was so scared of what it meant, and what people would think, and what my family would say, and I was scared of hurting you. So I pushed you away. I said it was a mistake because it was easier than admitting the truth. And what is the truth? I asked, my own voice barely a whisper, my heart hanging suspended on his answer. He closed the space between us, his hands coming up to grip my arms, his gaze intense and pleading. The truth, he said, his voice ragged, is that I don't know what I am. I don't know what this is. But I know that I can't lose you. I know that the thought of moving out tomorrow, of not waking up in the same apartment as you, of not having you, it feels like I'm being torn in half. I know that when you kissed me, it felt more right than anything has ever felt with Sarah or with anyone. And that terrifies me. But not as much as the thought of you looking at me with the hurt I saw in your eyes yesterday. That's the one thing I can't survive. He took a shuddering breath. I don't have all the answers. I'm a mess. But I don't want to live in the hallway anymore, either. I want to see what's behind the door. With you. If you'll still have me, the relief that flooded through me was so immense, so powerful, it felt like I could levitate. It wasn't a neat and tidy happy ending. It was messy and complicated and uncertain. But it was honest. It was real. I reached up and wiped the tears from his cheeks with my thumbs. I'll have you, I said, my own tears finally falling. I'll have you in whatever way you'll let me. We can figure it out together. He let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry, and pulled me into a hug, burying his face in my neck. He held me so tightly it felt like he was trying to merge our bodies into one, as if he could absorb the certainty he lacked from me. And I just held him back, my face pressed against his hair, breathing in the scent of him, the scent of home. We stood there, in the middle of my living room, holding on to each other like two survivors of a storm, and for the first time in days, The apartment was filled with a new kind of silence. It was the silence of acceptance, the silence of a beginning. The next morning, the cardboard box was still by the door. Liam woke up in my bed, curled against my side, and for the first time, there was no panic in his eyes when he saw me. Just a quiet, sleepy recognition. He watched me for a moment before speaking, his voice still rough with sleep. "I should call the landlord," he said, "and tell him I'm not taking the apartment." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of intent, a promise. A wave of warmth spread through my chest, a gentle, steady tide of peace. "Okay," I said, and that single word held a universe of meaning. It meant yes, it meant stay, it meant we'll figure this out, and so we began. We didn't try to define what we were. We let go of the need for labels, for a blueprint. We just existed, together, in the quiet space we had created. The first few weeks were a delicate dance of discovery. We learned a new language, one spoken not in words, but in small gestures. A hand on the small of my back as we passed in the hallway. The way he would now reach for my hand, without thinking, when we watched a movie on the couch. The way I would bring him a cup of coffee in the morning, just the way he liked it, without needing to be asked. We were mapping out a new territory, and we were doing it with a tenderness and a caution that spoke to how precious this new, fragile thing was to us both. The couch, once the symbol of our platonic boundary, became just a piece of furniture again. The office, where he had exiled himself for one miserable night, returned to being my workspace. And my bedroom became our room. There was no more pretense, no more silent, nocturnal migrations. He started leaving a toothbrush in the bathroom, a few t-shirts in my dresser drawer. He didn't move in, not officially, but he was home. The door to our room was now closed at night, not to shut the world out, but to keep our world in. It was our sanctuary, the place where we were most ourselves, where we could talk for hours in the dark about our fears and our hopes, untangling the knots of his confusion and my years of hidden love. It was a slow, patient process of healing for both of us. He was healing from the shock of a life upended and a self-image shattered, and I was healing from the quiet, lonely ache of a love I never thought would be returned. One afternoon, a month or so after our conversation, I was developing photos in my darkroom, which was really just a converted closet. He came and stood in the doorway, watching me, the red safe light casting him in a warm, crimson glow. I was swishing a piece of paper in the developer tray, waiting for the image to bloom. It was a photo I had taken of him a few weeks prior, one lazy Sunday morning. He was sitting at the kitchen table, bathed in the morning light, a small, genuine smile on his face as he looked at something just out of frame. As the image slowly materialized from the white paper, a ghost becoming a reality, he spoke. "That's what you do, you know," he said, his voice soft. "You see things. You see me." I looked from the photo, from his smiling image captured in silver and light, to him, standing there in the red glow of the darkroom, and my heart felt so full I thought it might burst. The greatest photograph I had ever taken wasn't on paper. It was the life we were building, the image of us, slowly, carefully, beautifully, coming into focus. We learn, eventually, that the most important structures in our lives are not built of wood and nails, but of vulnerability and trust. The safest rooms are not the ones with the strongest locks, but the ones where we are safe to be our truest selves. Liam came into my life like a force of nature, and for years I was content to orbit his sun, to observe his light from a safe distance. But the storm that broke him was the very thing that washed away the boundaries between us, leaving us on the shores of a new, undiscovered country. There was no map, no compass. All we had was each other. And so we began to build, not a house, but a home, right there in the beautiful, honest silence we had finally learned how to create together.